Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, this morning we are with Mr. Eric Biederman. We're going to be talking about the Idaho Stop. First of all, what is the Idaho Stop?
So the Idaho Stop is it's a common name for a set of laws called stop as yield laws. And these laws allow cyclists to take a different approach to intersections than the current set of laws that are active in most states, which treat cars and bicycles the same. Instead, the Idaho Stop approach allows a bicyclist to treat a stop sign as a yield sign. So if they approach the intersection and there's no conflicting bicycle or pedestrian or car traffic with the right-of-way, they can proceed through the intersection without making a complete stop. And then at intersections that are controlled by traffic lights, bicyclists must still come to a complete stop at a red light, but if there's no conflicting traffic with right-of-way, the cyclist is allowed to proceed through the intersection without waiting for the green light.
Fantastic. Why do we need to pursue that, or why did we pursue that in the state of New Mexico?
So we pursued it in New Mexico because in every state where the Idaho stop style laws have been implemented, they've seen a statistically significant safety benefit for bicyclists. They've seen a reduction in collisions between cars and bicycles and a reduction in the injuries and fatalities that result from those collisions. And the reason there is a safety benefit is because Idaho stop maneuvers reduce exposure of cyclists to cars in intersections. Essentially, the more quickly they can get through an intersection, the less likely they are to be struck by a car. These laws also increase the visibility of cyclists in intersections. So a moving bicyclist is easier to see than a bicycle that's stationary. And a bicycle is less likely to be caught in car blind spots if they continue moving. So that combination of factors results in fewer collisions between cars and bicycles. And there are some additional benefits as well. This can have an effect on route choices. So a cyclist may choose to ride on quieter streets that have a lot more stop signs if they can roll through them by treating them as yields. So they can save energy and proceed more quickly. And that may lead them to avoid roads that may be faster but have higher volumes of traffic. So there's a route choice effect here that affects safety. And then there's a safety in numbers effect too. So these laws have been demonstrated to make cycling more accessible because they save cyclists energy and more bicycles get out on the roads. There's a safety in numbers effect there. When there are higher cycling volumes, each individual cyclist tends to be safer.
Fantastic. So our next question to ask, how did getting the Idaho Stop codified into New Mexico law? What was the process? What did it look like?
So this law has now been passed statewide in the state of New Mexico, and so we went to the New Mexico State Legislature in their 60-day session that began in January of this year, 2025. We started the work early. The New Mexico legislative sessions are short. They're only 60 days, so you really need to hit the ground running, and ideally you already want to have legislation pre-filed before the session even begins. So our statewide bicycle coalition started this work well before the session started. Way back in 2024, we started working on identifying a sponsor for the bill, and Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez of Albuquerque stepped up to sponsor the bill. She immediately grasped the safety benefit that these laws provide. So we worked with her and her staff. We included Julie Radlosevich and Clifford Rees to develop the legislation and then pre-file it. So it was already on file before the legislative session even started. So it got a very early number in the Senate. It was Senate Bill 73. And then it had to wind its way through some Senate committees. So first it went to the Tax, Business, and Transportation Committee, where it passed unanimously. And then on to the Judiciary Committee, where it passed 8-1. So strong bipartisan support in both committees. And then it went on to the Senate floor, where it passed 36-2. So fantastic bipartisan support throughout the Senate. Then it moved on to the House, where it was picked up by Representative Pamela Herndon, who's also a strong supporter of bicycle safety. And she took it through the House. It went through one House committee, the Transportation Committee, and then onto the House floor, and then on to the governor for signature. So Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham signed it on March 21st, and now the bill is set to go into law on July 1st of this year.
So you mentioned the group effect.
Yeah.
How do you foresee this affecting cycling in New Mexico beyond just the group effect? Do you foresee more people getting out and biking now? And how do you think it'll affect the drivers' behavior? And what advocacy do we need to inform drivers that this law is in effect?
So we're starting a public education campaign that will be targeted at both motorists and bicyclists, helping everyone understand what this law is, how it works, why it's been implemented, how it's going to have a safety benefit. Studies have shown, there was one that just came out from Oregon State University that showed when everyone is well educated about this law, everybody tends to approach intersections more carefully. The U.S. Department of Transportation has also studied these laws, and they found that they don't increase conflicts between drivers and bicyclists. So everyone, once the word has gotten out, everyone understands that this is a legal maneuver by bicyclists, and so we don't see an increase in bullying behavior by drivers and whatnot. Drivers tend to bully cyclists as it is now, and so at least this law gives cyclists more freedom to choose when and how they cross intersections in a way that's safest for them. So, we expect this to have actually a positive effect on relations between bicyclists and drivers. There's the old scofflaw cyclists trope, complaints by drivers about cyclists not following the laws. We've essentially adapted the law to account for this rational behavior by bicyclists, because bicyclists have long known that this saves energy, it makes them safer, they get through intersections more quickly, and they're less likely to be hit. Now that the law is endorsing this behavior, we expect those relationships to see a net improvement. And in New Mexico, we also expect to see the same safety improvements that they've seen in other states. For example, the reason we call this law the Idaho Stop is it was pioneered by the state of Idaho way back in 1982. It wasn't originally conceived of as a safety law at that point. They were trying to reduce the burden on courts with minor traffic violations. But the year after the law was implemented, they saw a 14.5% reduction in bicyclist injuries and fatalities from collisions with cars at intersections. Delaware implemented their version of the law in 2017. They were the second state to do this. They saw a 23% reduction in collisions between cars and bicycles at intersections. So we expect to see the same kind of safety improvement here in New Mexico. That's really the prime motivator for implementing this law.
That's fantastic. Last question we'll ask. If you could change anything in New Mexico, whether it be laws or infrastructure, what would you change to make it a more bike-friendly state?
Yeah, I think infrastructure is the next thing we really need to focus on. The reason that we were able to pass this Idaho Stop law, quickly and effectively, one reason is that it's cheap. You're, changing a couple of pages of law in the New Mexico statutes for traffic laws, and then that's it. It goes into effect and it's there. Infrastructure is expensive. It takes time. It's harder to get, but we really need to have that to have the next big leap in improvement for safety for cyclists. We're just now starting to get our first protected bike lanes in the city of Albuquerque, for example. We need to make that kind of infrastructure much more widespread throughout the city. And when I say protection, I mean real protection, not just painted lanes, but physical barriers that prevent cars from encroaching onto bike lanes, for example. Better signalized crossings that maybe have signals dedicated to cyclists, or at least give them a leading crossing interval before cars are allowed to go, things like that. And that takes a lot more time, it takes investment, so those are the kind of things that are harder to get. I think we're starting to build the political will to get those kind of things in the city of Albuquerque, and then perhaps more statewide. But it's going to take some more time, but I think ultimately that's the kind of thing we need to have to see the next big improvement in bicycle safety now that we've implemented the Idaho Stop law.
Fantastic. Well, Eric, thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome.